Greetings, students. I'm Dr. Sadri, your instructor for this course, and today I'm going to focus on chapter 11, which is about feminism. Okay, one of the other very important, relatively newer theories. When we say newer, I guess we are comparing it with the mainstream theories. You remember the three mainstream theories we covered? We started with realism, we talk about liberalism, and then we talk about Marxism. Is that right? Those are the three mainstream theories, and then after that, there are a lot of alternative theories. This is one of them. I received some emails from some of the students, and they were saying, Dr. Sadi, I do not like this because, feminism basically suggests that, somebody is very, very liberal, and I'm very proud of my, conservative, upbringing and everything. Well, first of all, a couple of things. Number one, you're at school and you know me better. Is that right? I'm independent. I'm not even a Democrat or a Republican. Is that right? I mean, my family is actually split too, which is very interesting because whenever we have a family reunion, they start fighting one another about, all their different opinions and why they voted for this and who they think is a better leader or something. So when it gets really hot, then I become the, natural mediator and peacemaker because I don't want fight inside my own family. All right. I'm not talking about my kids. I'm talking about cousins and uncles and everybody else coming in. Anyway, we introduced you to a lot of different ideas. We're not suggesting that, you should do this or you should do that. That's all up to you. You see what I mean? So the reason I say that is because I noticed that some people are kind of sensitive to some issues. And then one of the things that I really want to focus on is, guys, you need to think that, for example, here we go. The best example is feminism. Is that right? Try to find out what is feminism all about. Okay, what is feminism all about? Well, feminism in some ways is really about the right of women. Okay? Now, it's not my place to tell you what you should think about. Remember, my own family, they came to this country because, we came here not because we couldn't eat. We came here because of with political, asylum because, we were politically and religiously being persecuted. But what I'm trying to tell you is, no matter what your idea is about feminism, you have to think about, we all come from our mothers. Is that right? I mean, none of our fathers have given birth yet, okay? That would be, if there is one has done that, I'd like to get to know. And that would be very interesting. But we're all coming from there, and we all respect our mothers because of all they have done for us. And some of us in our families, they have sisters. I have two sisters, okay? They're younger than me, and when my dad passed away, I actually became the father figure at very, very early age. From either 19, I became basically a father figure of my two younger sisters and my younger brother. We all care about these people in our families. Is that right? The women in our families, their mothers, grandmothers, sisters, uncle's wife, cousins, etc., etc. So try to figure out what these theories are talking about. I'm not suggesting that you should be a radical person on anything else, and if you want it to be, it's fine with me too. It doesn't change anything in my life. But try to understand what it is. So a lot of the feminist ideas, very frankly, they came out of the, disappointment of the female, portion of the population. And you might say, well, that's a portion of the population. Let me tell you something which I learned from one of my friends. And I do not know, I'm not a biologist. I do not know how much of this is true, but I'm telling you what I was told. I was told that if in any society, if you just leave it alone and you do not even do anything crazy like wars and execution of men and things like that, that somehow the society on its own produces more women than men. I don't know why. I'm a political scientist. I do not know how to, but I take it for granted that, okay, there's more women than men. Now, guess what? When there are political events or sometimes natural disaster kills everybody pretty much equally. But, when political events happen like civil wars and revolutions and those types of things, who do you think gets killed most of the time? Most of the time is guys. Is that right? Okay. Not always, though. In wars, also women die. Old people die, young people die, but most of the time it's guys, is that right? So that actually changes that balance in the society. So if before we always say it's 50-50, it's never 50-50, is that right? Apparently it's 53% or something like that, women, and to 47% men. Well, guess what? When there are more men dying, well, the portion actually changes more. And if we think that we are living, if we are thinking that we are living in a society which is open and democratic, and that's the majority of the population, you cannot deprive them from rights. Okay, who wants to deprive their mothers and sisters and girlfriends and I don't know cousins, female cousins or something of any kind of right? So that's the type of perspective that I want you to have. It's not like we are taking anything away from somebody. We just want to make sure that they're treated with respect. Okay, so in that regard, when you look at it, for example, feminism is the belief in the political, economic, and social equality of what? Of the sexes. And they don't say women are better. They just say that women should have equal rights. Okay, what's wrong with that? All right. So, having said that one, then we can talk about the feminist theory. Okay, I put all those slides for you. If you look at, for example, right now, slide number 3, you see that it says I put the 3 waves of feminist, thoughts. The first wave of it was from 18th century when the first writings and political activists they came about, all the way to 1920s. Okay, the second wave of it starts from 1960s. It ends up by the end of 1980s. And the third wave of it starts from 1990s and continues to the present. Okay, what was so special about the first wave? The first wave focused on legal equality. Now, it's very interesting because in our society, the way our founding fathers, they wrote some stuff, they wrote it so general at the beginning that everybody thought, okay, not just rich white men, but also all men and all women, they have rights. But there was some biases in our system. That's why I said even our system is not perfect. Is that right? It's better than many others, and it has a tendency to learn its mistake and improve itself. But still, here we go. So for a long period of time, only basically rich white men, they had a lot of rights. And then little by little, they included the poor white men. And then little by little, they included men from other ethnic groups. Is that right? And eventually, poor women were finally given the right that they deserved, you see, by 1920s and everything. And then even after that one, then it takes all the way to 1960s before what? Officially, we add to the system rights of minorities in general. Okay, so equal right in that first wave. Second wave was talking about equal opportunity. Okay, like for example, why shouldn't, for example, a woman also, instead of just being a nurse, apply for a medical school and become a doctor? I'm very proud of my daughter because that's what she did. She finished undergraduate at University of Virginia, where I got my PhD, and then she went to she went to Ireland and she did medical school over there. She always wanted to do it overseas. Fine. It was actually 1 year longer, which means more money, but okay, that was good for her. No problem. And then now she's doing her She's doing her residency in London. So equal opportunity. I mean, if they would have said, oh no, we don't take any girls. We just thought doctors have to be boys and then nurses have to be girls. I mean, what the heck? Is that right? I mean, we are living in the 21st century. So equal opportunity, very important. Last but not least, since 1990s, the emphasis has been also to include different classes of people and different ethnicities. So like in that regard, women from lower classes, that's important. Women from other ethnic groups, Africans, African Americans, I meant, and Hispanics. And, the term general, when we say Hispanic, it includes a lot of different groups of people because, Puerto Ricans are different from Mexicans are different from Argentinians are different from Spaniards, etc. But anyway, what we wanted to make sure is that there is inclusion as opposed to exclusion. Now, one of the other slides that I put over there for you talks about gender. Okay, I want you to, I'm going to actually read it for you to make sure that this comes from actually your textbook by Haynes. Is that right? It says gender refers to how the identities of masculinity and femininity are perceived and acted upon societally. So here, by the way, Hayes says that one in page 151. Is that right? So I want you to understand what he's talking about. It's not just gender is not necessarily the focus on sex. It's the political value of that one. And then another thing that I put over there in that slide for you is from Tickner, work on feminism and everything, which is considered one of the classics right now. I mean, it's not really old, to be honest with you, but it's still considered classics. It came out at 2013. It says a set of social, gender. This is their definition of gender. Gender, a set of socially constructed characteristics describing what men and women ought to be. Isn't that interesting? Ought to be. It kind of reminds us of, do you remember that discussion earlier in our, semester about realism versus idealism? Is that right? And then some of the material that I put, the realist, they would say, what is, and the idealist would say, what ought to be. Is that right? So it's kind of interesting that some of these theories, they go on what the most basic one. And one of the things that I actually added for you is to show you also how a woman can make a difference. Is that right? And I thought, let's go and look at one of the friendly countries to go to the U.S. and one of them is what? Israel. Is that right? And I put over there for you a slide that includes information about Marcia Friedman, okay, a woman who has been a journalist, has been a political activist, and she's trying to bring a sense of peace and community and everything between Israelis and Palestinians. She's obviously, Jewish, Israeli, but she's trying to do that, And I put, and the title of it is a personal look at an Israeli politics. Is that right? And it talks about the impact that this feminist, a leader in the community is making it. It's making a difference. You don't need to have, I'm not suggesting you shouldn't have any kind of big budget to do anything. I'm just trying to tell you, here we go. There's a lady who's making a difference without having like millions of dollars worth of budgets and, huge bureaucracies to help her. She's making a difference in the community. God bless her. Is that right? Okay, next one. And I hope that by me saying God bless her, it doesn't offend those of you who are agnostic or atheist, all right? It just comes from my background. All right. Next one is a focus on the feminist IR theory. And here, one of the other very, very famous, people who's a pioneer in that is Cynthia Enloy, okay? And then what I wanted to do is actually read one of her major works, okay? It says the feminist IR canvas is wider than the non-feminist IR canvas. Interesting. Okay. She says the feminist palette holds a much wider range of colors and textures than the inadequate non-feminist, palette. And then for the future, we may have to add even more space or canvas, more colors to our palettes, and even more brushes to our kit. What's it she's talking about? She's trying to open up our mind to different possibilities. Is that right? Sounds like I'm talking about Star Trek, different possibilities, okay? So here we go. What I think, this is what she says, not me. What I think is that the hallmark of feminist IR is that what we are not afraid of such a future. Interesting. Very bright woman. Very, very bright. Okay. So having said that one, then we come on to a number of items associated with what? With the feminist theory, and I'm just going over it one by one. One of it is considered the notion of marginalization of women in international politics. Oh my God, let's look at it. Is that right? I mean, majority of the leadership position are taken by men, just like the domestic system. And then there are issues that women, they can play a role, and they play their role, and unfortunately they don't get enough credit for it. One of it is women in development. Oh, by the way, since I said that one, let me tell you that one of the issues that we have discovered as political scientists is that, yes, men and women, we are the same species, is that right? But we have different priorities. Like, for example, our research shows that women, they have a tendency to usually opt for tendency. It doesn't mean all the women though, is that right? Because there are women who are interested in some other things that I'm going to tell you about too. Like, for example, they have a tendency to be interested in education, development, family issues. You see what I mean? Isn't it interesting? Okay. Now, this doesn't mean that there are no men. In my own family, there are guys who lost their wife and then they raise their kids from little kids. Is that right? So yeah, it doesn't mean that this guy doesn't care and just the women do. Yeah, but what I'm trying to talk about is, remember, in political scientists, as a political scientist, we talk about what? The general notion, the trends, okay? So that's kind of interesting. So women in development kind of goes hand in hand. In fact, when we study human society all the way back, we see that men are hunters, women are gatherers. Is that right? And agriculture was basically developed by women. putting seeds over there, watering it, and oh wow, here we go. I don't have to go and try to hunt a huge animal much bigger than me, and which there is a tendency to kill me. Is that right? If they were, attacking those type of animals. But here we go. I can provide food near my cave by, just doing that. So women in development are kind of connected. The other one is the reproductive rights. Okay. In some countries, they have put a limit on how many kids you can have. In some countries, some people were not supposed to even produce. I mean, here we go. For example, in Nazi Germany, most, relatively in terms of history, example of it, there were people who were not supposed to produce, because they were producing weak people. Guess what? We go to the histories like that too. For example, in Sparta, is that right? One of the city-states in Greece, okay, which we are very proud of their culture and everything else. It was very different from Athens. Athens, things were kind of cool, is that right? Sparta, because they were so much emphasizing their military and everything. Somebody, as soon as a woman would give birth, they would go over there, hold the kid upside down, and this and that, and see if the arms comes up, this comes up. If it is, that means that this kid is very, very weak. They would kill the kid. Can you imagine? All right? They would kill the kid. Like that woman doesn't have any kind of right to her own child because they say our society has to be nice and strong and blah, blah, blah. Okay, whatever. Is that right? And then even the ones that, were strong enough and everything, at by the age of 2, 3, 4, 5, pretty much right after they were out of the diapers or whatever. Is that right? Because obviously nobody wanted to care about that one. They would send him to special schools. From those special schools, they would teach him from very, very early age to what? To be a warrior. First of all, they would give him wood and everything to start, hitting animals and killing animals and things like that. And as they were going up, they were hitting each other, learning about. That's why Sparta, in the old, ancient period, had one of the best military. But look at the way they behave. They behave basically like a fascist. Is that right? I mean, there's no if but maybe about it, And interesting enough, with all that stuff they did was, who do we remember? We remember the city of Athens, which is famous for arts and philosophy. And their military was okay. It wasn't great. Is that right? But Sparta, with all that military and everything, sometimes they do not even know what the heck it was. All right. So reproductive rights, very, very important. Also sexual discrimination. Oh, you're a woman, so you cannot do this. Or you're a woman, you cannot do that. These things are all kind of officially, as far as at least international, law is concerned, kind of ended with what we call the CD, AW, rights in 1981. What was that? That was a convention on elimination of all kind of discrimination against women. Okay, so read that one and the text. All right. What are some of the other things beyond the marginalization of women in international politics? The other one is patriarchy, reinforces marginalization and insecurity. Of whom? Of women. Okay, so what is patriarchy? Patriarchy is the male dominance of the society. And what I did for you to make it nice and neat and organized in the slide, if you notice in the slide number 8, so I put something about marginalization, definition, examples, I thought that was pretty straightforward, but you're more than welcome to go and take a look at even more. Then, again, continuation of the patriarchy reinforces marginalization and security. What are some of the subcategories right here? I put like 4 subcategories for you. One is the economic, in terms of economic advancement. It basically, it's hindered for women. It's basically hindered by what? Patriarchy. Another one, even in terms of nationalism, most of the heroes and everything, they end up being men. Well, guess what? A lot of those men, they could not get their job done if there is not the support by the women in the society. So, but poor women, they would not get enough attention for that. And then there's the notion of the war. And in the war, of course, there's the sexual abuse of women, okay? I remember, that, I had a friend who ended up going, for his job, reporting on, civil wars and everything else. And he was telling me all those stories about how in many of these civil wars and everything, he sees women and, girls, and their daughters or something, they're getting raped. And one of the stories he told me that I just couldn't believe it. I believe it, but it's just hard to believe that a human being would do that one to another human being. They were raping even 7 and 8-year-old girls. What the heck is a sexual value with 7 or 8-year-old? I didn't think it was about sex. I think it was about power and domination of another group of people, which I don't know about you, but I don't see it to be fair at all, whatsoever. and these people have to be punished for that type of behavior. Anyway, last but not least is the notion of domestic violence. Is that right? And this one, in some societies, when you talk about domestic violence, they say, oh, because they allow honor killing and whatever else, because, oh, their daughter, embarrassed the family or something like that. Is that right? They try to create this whole notion of dichotomy between private and public place, and they say, this is not your business. This is our private business. Well, killing your daughter or punishing her in a very bad way, is that right? That is a crime, okay? I don't care what is the culture or something. That's a crime, so that's not acceptable. Then the next notion I put for you, and you can see slide number 10, is beyond the marginalization of women and patriarchy is the masculinity epistemology. And here we're talking about what's the meaning of it. Okay, I put the meaning for it too. And male way of thinking about what? About this particular subject. I put also some information over there for you if you wanted to find it, because I thought if I do it this way, then you would have a general idea of what your chapter is talking about, and then you can understand more about the details. Then under that one, I had 3 subcategories for you. One of it is sovereignty, the other one is power and geopolitics, and last but not least, security. In each one of them, we see that this masculinity, basically under these subcategories, is undermining women. In terms of the, sovereignty, the whole notion of, an independence, the notion of putting pressure on the women in one way or another, treating them differently. In terms of power and geopolitics, same thing, is that right? Unequal power and, getting even help from geopolitics to put women down. And last but not least, by emphasizing on security for certain group of people, they make women to feel insecure. That's not fair. Okay. So one of the last couple of subjects and slides right there is slide number 12, is that right? Which is focusing on ecofeminism. This one is basically a link between women and environment, okay? And some of the works by, for example, the term actually was coined by Dioban, so I want you to read that work. I want you to also, I mentioned actually 2 other people too. One is Shiva, okay? And the other one is Ryother, okay? So I already mentioned 3 of them for you. Here applies the logic of radical feminism to political ecology. So if you wanted to know what is the general notion. And what agency could we say that is connected to these type of notions and supports it or whatever? UN support, United Nations basically supports the developmental, environmental, and women issues, events in that regard. Last but not least, a slide that I put over there is also talking about the queer theory. Some people, they think that, what is this theory anyway in IR? Well, to be very honest with you, it's a newcomer to IR. Okay, because it was this as a discipline was established in other places first before it comes to IR, and it highlights the operations of international, power are shaped by basically sexual norms and logics. Okay, so one thing you need to understand is when I'm talking about the queer theory, this is not a movement to advance gay rights in international affairs. Okay, it's a different notion. In that regard, we can say like critical theory, post-colonialism, feminism, it's a part of the attempt to reduce the neglect of identities in IR and reveal a deeper and more accurate picture of the political world. All right, I finished right now this chapter on feminism. Again, as you notice that I'm covering a lot of the general ideas. What I want you to do is now that you have the big picture, you have my PowerPoint, you have all those, supplementary material that I put for you, please go ahead and read the chapters, more details, because right now your brain has already created all these like little categories up there. So, okay, so this extra piece of information can go right there based on what Sadri basically suggested in those bigger categories. So hopefully that makes it a little bit easier to digest. You still have questions? Feel free to email me. I will be more than happy to answer. Have a nice one. Thank you very much for your attention.